The mountains of the Spingar Range were unforgiving gods, ancient and indifferent to the blood that stained their scree slopes. Tonight they were a tomb. For SEAL Team Orion, the mission had collapsed into a single, desperate reality. A narrow, claw-shaped ravine under a sky choked with ash and malice. Trapped, pinned down by an overwhelming force dug into the high ground, their position was untenable, their exfiltration route a shooting gallery. The enemy, a seasoned insurgent cadre with surprisingly sophisticated electronic warfare gear, had turned the ravine into a kill box. Every frantic burst of communication was a screech of static, every shadow a potential final breath. Lieutenant Commander Thorne, Orion's leader on the ground, pressed himself against a rock that shuddered with the impact of another RPG. Havoc Base, this is Orion 1, he bit out, his voice a low growl of controlled desperation. We are decisively engaged, taking heavy fire from elevated positions.
Requesting immédiate CAS, danger close.
I say again, danger close. The reply from the distant forward operating base was a ghost of a voice, distorted by the jamming net blanketing the valley. Ryan 1 negative corridor, weather not viable. The message, fragmented as it was brutally clear. No help was coming. The ceiling was too low, the winds too violent, the enemy's anti-air and jamming too thick. No fixed wing could navigate the treacherous canyon, and for a standard helicopter it was suicide. Thorne swore, a quiet, vicious sound swallowed by the cacophony of battle. He risked a look, seeing two of his men providing covering fire while a third dragged a wounded operator back behind a meager fold in the rock. They were bleeding out in more ways than one. At Havoc Base, the air in the command tent was thick with the tension of monitored failure. Colonel Matheson stared at the topographical map, a flickering red icon marking Orion's position. A death sentence. Every asset he had was grounded by the storm front pushing in or negated by the jamming. Every option led to a dead end. Except one. In the corner of the tent, observing the unfolding catastrophe with a stillness that was almost unnerving, was Major Eva Rostova. She wasn't a frontline pilot anymore, not officially. A training incident, a politically inconvenient outcome, a quiet reassignment to a dusty desk job advising on logistics and mission planning. She was a ghost on the roster, a name associated with simulations and after-action reports, not live triggers. Her flight suit was immaculate but rarely used. She stood near the comms panel, her eyes closed, listening not just to the garbled transmissions but to the spaces between them. The rhythm of the gunfire, the pauses, the desperation. She could feel the shape of the fight, the geometry of the ravine. She had flown it before, years ago, in a different war under a different name. She knew its teeth. Colonel Matheson slammed a hand on the table, the map flickering. Get me a Predator feed. Anything. An operations officer, a young captain with panic in his eyes, shook his head. No link, sir. The jammer is blanketing everything up to 20,000 feet. Nothing is getting through. Another voice, this one from a Pentagon liaison patched in via a tenuous satellite link, was clinical and detached. Colonel, the models are clear. Without a clean ingress corridor, any air support presents an unacceptable risk of fratricide. The rules of engagement are unambiguous, unacceptable risk. The words hung in the air, sterile and obscene, while men were dying. Matheson's jaw was a knot of granite. He knew the liaison was right by the book. The book, however, wasn't bleeding out in a ditch in eastern Afghanistan. So we're just going to listen to them die? Matheson's voice was dangerously low. Is that the order? The liaison's voice was tinny, devoid of emotion. The order is to mitigate further losses. Do not compound the error. All air assets are to hold. Eva Rostova stepped forward. Her movement was so quiet it barely registered until she spoke. Sir, I can get in. Matheson turned, his expression a mixture of surprise and dismissal. He'd almost forgotten she was there. Major Rostova, you heard the liaison.
No corridor, no clearance.
Your Apache is configured for long-range observation, not a danger-close gun run in a storm. He was referring to the AH-64E sitting on the far end of the flight line, an aircraft kept in a state of readiness that far exceeded its official mission profile. Her bird. "The book is wrong, Colonel," she said, her voice even, without a trace of challenge or insubordination. It was a statement of fact. The storm provides cover. The jamming blinds them as much as it blinds us, but they're expecting us to be blind. "I'm not," the captain stared at her. "Major, the terrain is impossible. The wind shear alone could tear a rotor off." "I know the route," she replied, her gaze fixed on Matheson. "There's a river cut below the ridgeline. It's not on your map. It will shield me from their radar until the last second." Matheson hesitated. He was a man drowning, and she was offering him a stone. It might be an anchor or it might be a stepping stone. He looked at the red icon on his screen, then at the unwavering certainty in her eyes. It was a certainty born not of arrogance, but of absolute competence. "This is not authorized, Major. If you go against a direct order. Your career is over." Eva gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "What career?" Without another word, she turned and walked out of the command tent into the howling wind. The ground crew, huddled under the lip of a maintenance hangar, watched her approach the lone Apache. They knew her. Not the paper-pushing major from the planning division, but the pilot who came out at night to commune with her machine, who knew every rivet and fluid line by heart. They were the keepers of the base's unwritten history, and they remembered the stories about her, whispers of impossible flights in places that didn't officially exist. Her crew chief, a grizzled master sergeant named Diaz, was already there, anticipating her before she'd even left the tent. He held her helmet out. "Fuel is topped, ordnance is hot-loaded from the last alert. She's ready to bite." He didn't ask if she was cleared. He didn't need to. He saw it in her eyes. Eva swung herself into the cockpit, the familiar scent of hydraulic fluid and worn leather a comfort. Her movements were a fluid, economic ritual. Straps pulled tight, switches flipped, systems brought to life with a muscle memory that transcended thought. Her hands moved over the controls, her touch light, almost caressing. This aircraft wasn't just a machine. It was a partner, scarred and lethal. Her fingers brushed against a small, crudely engraved plate bolted to the instrument panel, a memento from a previous life. Manus Inimicus, Manus Amicus, the enemy's hand, the friend's hand. A reminder of the razor's edge she flew. She pulled on her gloves, her gaze falling on the small, faded patch on her sleeve. A stylized Valkyrie, wings spread, carrying a fallen warrior from the battlefield. A call sign from a past she was supposed to have forgotten. As the twin turbines spooled up with a rising scream, she closed her eyes for a second, a line from her first flight instructor echoing in her mind. "The instruments will lie to you. The weather will lie to you. Listen to the airframe. The machine knows the way. Just listen." She keyed her helmet mic, bypassing the command channel for a direct link to the tower. "Havoc Tower, this is Wraith. Taking off. East departure." The tower operator's voice was a squawk of confusion and alarm. "Wraith, hold position. You are not cleared for takeoff. I repeat, you are not cleared." The rest of his transmission was lost in the thunderous wash of her rotors as she lifted off, not climbing, but dropping low, a dark predator skimming just feet above the rain-slicked tarmac before vanishing into the turbulent dark. The Apache, call sign Wraith, flew into the storm's maw. Eva kept it low, a phantom hugging the contours of the earth. The world outside the canopy was a maelstrom of sand and rain, a churning chaos that would have sent any other pilot back to base. Her navigation screens flickered, surrendering to the enemy's electronic warfare. The GPS was a ghost, the data link dead. She was flying blind, but she could see. She saw the land not as a digital map, but as a living, breathing thing. She felt the shift in air pressure as she neared a ridge, the subtle lift as she passed over a dry wash. This was her true element. On the command net, chaos reigned. "Unidentified aircraft. You are in a restricted flight zone. Identify yourself immediately." Colonel Matheson's voice cut through the noise, sharp and authoritative. "All stations, stand by. Wraith, report your position." There was no reply. Eva was in her own bubble of concentration, the cockpit a sanctuary of humming avionics and the steady, rhythmic thump-thump-thump of the main rotor. She was now at the mouth of the canyon, a jagged scar in the earth invisible to anyone not directly upon it. The wind shear was a physical force, trying to rip the controls from her hands. The Apache bucked and shuddered, groaning in protest. She didn't fight it. She danced with it, anticipating its violent whims, feeding in minute corrections to the cyclic and pedals, keeping the aircraft stable through sheer force of will and instinct. In the ravine, the SEALs were making their last stand. Thorne had consolidated his team behind a rockslide, a pathetic excuse for cover. The volume of fire was immense. Orion 1 to any friendly station, we are taking casualties, ammo critical, he yelled into his mic, knowing it was probably useless. Suddenly, a new sound cut through the din of battle. A low, guttural whine that grew rapidly into a percussive, world-shattering roar. It wasn't the high-pitched scream of a jet engine, but something heavier, more visceral. It was the sound of rotors beating the air into submission. Hope, a dangerous and unfamiliar feeling, sparked in Thorne's chest. He looked at his comms officer. Is that? The man shook his head, his eyes wide. No one's cleared, sir. Command said no. The sound grew louder, closer. Too close. It was inside the canyon with them. Then she arrived. The Apache didn't scream over the ridge line in a blaze of glory. It materialized from the storm like an apparition, rising just enough to clear the canyon floor before leveling off. It was a dark, angular beast of pure aggression, rain streaming from its fuselage. For a split second, friend and foe alike froze, stunned by the sheer audacity of its presence. Before anyone could process what was happening, the nose of the Apache dipped. A stream of fire, a torrent of 30mm high-explosive dual-purpose rounds, erupted from the M230 chain gun under its chin. It wasn't a spray-and-pray pass. It was surgery. A machine gun nest that had pinned down two of Thorne's men vanished in a precise burst of smoke and shrapnel. The rounds impacted less than 5 feet from the SEAL's cover, a line of erupting earth that walked directly onto the enemy position and erased it. Another burst, this one targeting a sniper hidden in a crevice high on the opposite cliff face. The rock around his position disintegrated. The enemy fire faltered, replaced by confusion. On the ground, Thorne's team could only stare in disbelief. Holy, one of them breathed. They had been prepared for a bomb run that might kill them along with the enemy. This was something else entirely. This was a scalpel in a hurricane. Through the static, a clear, calm female voice cut through the net for the first time. It was devoid of panic, devoid of adrenaline. It was the voice of absolute control. Orion 1, this is Valkyrie on station. Designate targets. Thorne snapped out of his shock. Valkyrie. The call sign landed with the weight of myth. He keyed his mic, his voice rasping with newfound hope. Valkyrie, Orion 1. You're a goddamn ghost. We have heavy machine gun positions on the northeast ridge. Coordinates. I see them, she interrupted. The Apache pirouette in mid-air, a maneuver of impossible grace and lethality. The chain gun spoke again, a short, brutal sentence. The machine gun position ceased to exist. In the Havoc base command tent, they watched on a single, flickering infrared feed from a drone that had managed to punch through the jamming for a few precious seconds. They saw the Apache, a white-hot specter against the cold rock, moving with a predator's certainty. Colonel Matheson stood motionless, the phone to the Pentagon liaison forgotten in his hand. He just watched, a slow, dawning realization on his face. He wasn't watching an act of insubordination. He was watching a master at work. The initial shock of Valkyrie's arrival wore off, replaced by a furious, targeted response. The insurgents were not amateurs. They had planned for air support, just not this kind. From hidden caves and camouflaged positions, new threats emerged. The sharp, terrifying screech of a manpad's launch cut through the air. A plume of smoke corkscrewed towards the Apache. Missile launch. Left side. Thorne yelled into his mic. But Eva had already seen it. The aircraft broke hard, dispensing a cloud of incandescent flares. The missile, seduced by the hotter signature, detonated harmlessly against the canyon wall. But it was a warning. They were adapting. Another team surfaced, this one armed with a ZSU-23-4 Shilka, a self-propelled anti-aircraft gun hidden under camouflage netting in a small wadi. Its 4 cannons opened up, spewing a terrifying web of tracer fire across the narrow canyon. The air around the Apache became a lethal lattice of exploding shells. Warning lights flashed across Eva's console. A stray round had found its mark, punching through the tail boom. The aircraft yawed violently. She fought it, her feet dancing on the rudder pedals, wrestling the machine back under control. She was bleeding hydraulic fluid. On the command net, the tone had shifted entirely. Doubt was gone, replaced by a desperate reliance. "Valkyrie, talk to me." Colonel Matheson's voice was clipped, focused. "What's your status? What do you need?" "Taking fire. The Shilka is my priority," she responded, her voice tight but unwavering. She jinked the Apache behind a rock spire, the enemy tracers stitching lines of light across the space she had just occupied. Fuel was dropping faster than she liked. Her flare count was dwindling. The rhythm of the battle had changed. It was no longer a turkey shoot. It was a duel. The SEALs, emboldened by her presence, began to maneuver, using the suppression from the Apache to gain better firing positions. "Valkyrie, this is Orion 1. Thorne's voice was a lifeline. "We're marking the Shilka with IR. Can you see it?" "Affirmative, Orion," she said. "Keep their heads down. I'm going in." She knew a direct approach was suicide. The Shilka's radar would lock her, and its cannons would shred her before she got a missile off. She had to do something they would never expect. The Shilka was tucked under a deep rock overhang, shielding it from any attack angle above the canyon rim. It was a perfect defensive position, designed to kill anything that tried to fly down the ravine's center line. To hit it, Eva would have to break every rule of safe flight. She would have to go below it. Pushing the cyclic forward, she dove, dropping the Apache until its skids were just feet above the churning, muddy river at the canyon's bottom. The walls of the ravine became a terrifying blur on either side of her canopy. This was sub 60 feet, a realm where one mistake, one sudden gust of wind, meant instant death. She was flying not by instruments, but by the feel of the air pressure against the fuselage, the sound of the rotors echoing off the close rock walls. "Valkyrie, what is your approach vector?" Matheson's voice was strained, unable to comprehend what his limited sensors were telling him. "Below them," was her only reply. The Apache raced up the riverbed, a fleeting shadow in the dark. As she neared the Shilka's position, she did the unthinkable. She pulled back hard on the cyclic, simultaneously kicking the left pedal. The Apache, a machine not designed for aerobatics, reared up like a striking cobra. Its nose went vertical. For a heart-stopping second, the aircraft hung in the air, rotors clawing for purchase, the airframe groaning under the strain. Through her helmet-mounted display, she locked a Hellfire missile onto the Shilka's heat signature. "Rifle," she whispered, the command to fire. The missile shot off its rail with a roar, a streak of fire that covered the few hundred yards to the target in an instant. She didn't wait to see the impact. As the missile left the rail, she was already pushing the nose over, completing a gut-wrenching wing-over maneuver that sent the Apache plummeting back towards the river, narrowly avoiding the opposite canyon wall. The world in her cockpit was a dizzying kaleidoscope of rock, sky, and warning alarms. Behind her, the overhang erupted in a massive fireball. The Shilka, and the ammunition stored with it, cooked off in a spectacular secondary explosion that lit up the entire canyon. In the command tent, there was only silence. The liaison from the Pentagon was speechless. They had just witnessed a helicopter perform a maneuver that shouldn't have been possible, an act of aerial violence that was as beautiful as it was deadly. With the Shilka destroyed and the primary enemy position silenced, the tide had turned. The remaining insurgent fire was sporadic, panicked. "Valkyrie, this is Orion 1. Extraction bird is inbound. 5 minutes out," Thorne reported, his voice filled with a reverence that bordered on awe. "We need you to keep their heads down while we pull back," acknowledged Orion. "I'll hold the door open," Eva replied. Her fuel light was now a steady, angry red. The damage to her tail was causing a persistent vibration that she could feel in her teeth. She climbed, positioning the Apache between the SEAL's fallback position and the remaining enemy pockets. She became a magnet for their fire. RPGs and machine gun rounds streaked towards her, but she was no longer just dodging. She was orchestrating. She drew the fire of a hidden RPG team, jinking left at the last moment. The maneuver wasn't just for her own survival. It exposed the team's position in the muzzle flash. Orion 3 RPG team, 2 o'clock high, in the shadows, she said calmly. On the ground, a SEAL sniper who had been waiting for just such an opportunity sent a single, precise round, and the threat was neutralized. The extraction chopper, a big Z-47 Chinook, lumbered into the canyon, its pilots flying with a confidence they would not have had minutes before. Valkyrie was their guardian angel, a fearsome one. As the SEALs scrambled aboard the Chinook, a final manpads launched from a desperate, last-ditch position. It screamed towards the vulnerable transport. Eva didn't have flares left. She didn't have time for a complex maneuver. She simply put her aircraft in the way. She sideslipped the Apache, intending to shield the Chinook with her own airframe, a final sacrificial act. But at the last second, seeing the missile's trajectory was slightly off, she banked hard away. The missile, unable to correct its course in time, flew past the Chinook and detonated against the far cliff. On the ramp of the Chinook, Thorne watched the entire sequence unfold. He saw the Apache, damaged and bleeding, deliberately place itself in harm's way for them. The single word that had been forming in his mind solidified into a legend. Valkyrie. In the Havoc Base command tent, Colonel Matheson listened to the comms traffic confirming all SEALs were on board and pulling out. He turned to the stunned captain next to him. Log the time, and get me Major Rostova's full, unredacted service record. Now the battle was over. The fury had subsided, leaving only the sound of the Chinook's rotors fading into the storm and the lone, steady beat of the Apache holding station, ensuring they made it out clean. Eva Rostova landed Wraith on a runway slick with rain and firefighting foam. Emergency crews, seeing the state of the aircraft, pockmarked with shrapnel holes, trailing a thin stream of hydraulic fluid, had scrambled as a precaution. As the turbines spooled down with a final weary sigh, a profound silence fell over the flight line. The usual boisterous shouts of the ground crews were absent. They stood back, watching in hushed respect as the canopy opened. Colonel Matheson was there, waiting at the bottom of the ladder. He didn't speak as Eva unstrapped and climbed down, her movements stiff with exhaustion. She walked past him, her focus on the crew chief, Diaz, who was already inspecting the damage with a practiced eye. "She'll fly again, Major," Diaz said, his voice gruff with emotion. "You just tell me when." Eva simply nodded, then finally turned to face the colonel. Matheson looked from her to the battered helicopter and back again. The debrief would be a mess of contradictions, a flagrant violation of orders that resulted in the saving of an entire SEAL team. A reprimand and a Medal of Valor warring for space on the same report. "You were ordered to stand down, Major," he said, his voice flat, formal. "Yes, sir," she replied, her face impassive. "Orion team is safe. My aircraft is recoverable." Matheson held her gaze for a long moment. "Go get some rest. My office, 0800". He turned and walked away, the unspoken message hanging in the air. The reprimand was a necessity. The reverence was a fact. Later that night, as she was walking back to her quarters, Lieutenant Commander Thorne found her. He wasn't in uniform. He stood in her path, his face bruised and grimed with the dirt of the ravine, but his eyes were clear. He didn't offer a salute or a handshake. He simply held out his hand. In his palm was his team's trident patch. "We don't have a word for what you did," he said, his voice low and heavy with meaning. "So we'll just say thank you." He pressed the patch into her hand. "We owe you." Eva looked at the small embroidered symbol, then back at him. She gave a single, brief nod of acceptance, closed her hand around the patch, and pocketed it without a word. Her actions had already said everything necessary. She went to her bunk, but not to sleep. Instead, she went to the silent, waiting form of her Apache, placing a hand on the cold, damaged skin of its fuselage. A quiet communion, a silent thank you to her partner. The sun rose over Havoc Base, burning away the last of the storm. On the flight line, Wraith sat cordoned off, a monument to the night's violence. Technicians moved around it with a quiet reverence, their voices low as they documented the battle scars. The puncture in the tail boom, the spiderweb cracks in an armored panel, the scorched paint where a missile had passed too close. The dust of the Spin-Gar Mountains was caked onto its skin like a hard-earned medal. Stars still pricked the western sky, faint against the dawn. In Colonel Matheson's office, Eva's file lay open on his desk. The unredacted version told a story of a pilot whose skills were matched only by the institution's inability to properly wield them. He picked up a pen, drew a single, thick line through her current assignment description, Logistical Planning Advisor, and in the margin, wrote 2 words, Chief Instructor, Advanced Aerial Combat. The sky would remember what had happened in that canyon. The wind would whisper the story of the pilot who danced with the storm and flew where no one else dared. But more importantly, the men of Orion Team would remember. The story of Valkyrie's run would be told in hushed, awe-filled tones in forward operating bases and sterile ready rooms for years to come. A new myth forged in fire and precision. For Eva Rostova, there was no celebration, no ceremony. There was only the quiet satisfaction of a job done, of lives saved. She stood at her window, watching the sun climb higher, the trident patch from Thorn a heavy, solid weight in her pocket. The quiet was a temporary reprieve. She knew another call would come, another impossible mission, another moment where the book would fail and only instinct and courage would suffice. And she would be ready. The sky was waiting,